Hi, this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And today we have a special guest, Don Norwin, and he is an animation fan like me. So we're going to discuss animation. I guess he's a fan of the Grinch and the Looney Tunes, and what else you got back there? You got to tell me. So,
So, yeah, it's good to meet you, Mark. Yeah, this room currently is set up, and I guess I only put the hat on because I figured since Tom Cito wore a patch, I had to do something besides an eye patch, so I went with the hat. So
very good.
since it is Christmas, I generally have most of the Grinch stuff in my office, along the wall here, and in fact, most of the other rooms at this point. And I guess most of my collection, or a good portion of it, is divided between Warner Brothers and Disney.
Okay. Now, where are you hailing from today, and how did you get interested in all this animation stuff? Double question.
I'm in Texas
Okay.
currently. I was going to say I spent most of my life in Wisconsin, but I guess at my age, most of my life's been spent down here now. So um, um, I I guess I got interested in animation long before I knew it was actually animation. My grandfather was good friends with Walt Disney.
Oh,
And he owned Wolf Printing Company, which got bought by Western Publishing.
right.
And my grandfather kept the Golden Books and the Gold Key Dell comic licenses, and all of those, of course, were managed almost exclusively at that time by Walt himself.
Hmm.
And so Walt would come to St. Louis, which is where my grandfather was, and Western was at that time, and he and Walt got to be friends, and Walt would come out to the house in St. Louis, and I remember getting to meet him and spend some time talking to him. However, at that age, and I generally don't tell people exactly how old I am because I like to make it more of an arithmetic, but I would say on the south side of when I was born, Chuck Jones was releasing things like Duck 'em Up, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, Bully for Bugs, those kinds. And on the
Mhm.
north side, it was like One Froggy Evening, Zoom and Board. So, if that doesn't pinpoint, and of course, Disney had Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland on the south side, and
Mhm.
Lady and the Tramp and Sleeping Beauty on the north side. So, framed
Mhm.
in there gives you a perspective that I'm older than dirt. But Walt would come out to the house, and when I would meet him at that time, I was probably, I guess the first time I met him, I was maybe 9. And at that point, Walt was really just the guy that owned Disneyland. And
Mhm.
and to me, that was the coolest thing ever.
Well, of course, he
And
was hosting the TV show at that point, so he's had some fame, didn't
but
he?
but he was still the guy that owned Disneyland. And to a
Right.
9-year-old kid,
Okay, I get it. I get it. Okay, fine.
that was kind of my jam, right? He was that guy.
Yeah.
So he was, I got to meet him, which was great. Unfortunately, I probably didn't get to ask him anything like I would ask him today if
Right.
if I had had a chance to meet him now. But that was kind of the wonderful thing that was part of that. And and during the time that I was growing up, my babysitter was the television, and cartoons were obviously my drug of choice.
Hmm.
And that was pretty much, if you wanted to turn on the TV, it was going to be cartoons. And I guess when I went through, growing up that way, I got to the point where it was just really second nature, and it had a genesis that really formed a lot more of what was going on in my life. For
Hmm.
instance, when my mother always was, "Oh, you should take piano lessons." I said, "Oh, great, fine, whatever."
Hmm.
So when I did, I went, and the person that I went to see, who was at that time probably older than Lincoln, but I'm not sure. And she said, "What kind of music do you like?" And I said, "I don't know what kind, but said, I'll sing something." I did. She goes, "Oh, you like Wagner?" And I said, "Yeah, I like Wagner, whatever." Well, I was singing Ride of the Valkyries from, What's Opera Doc. And then the band leader, Disney's band leader was William Tell Overture from Rossini. So
Okay.
I was doing all these songs from cartoons, and she said, "Oh, you like Wagner, you like von Stupp, you like," and she was listening. I'm going, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I like all those." So my piano training was all classical music at that time.
Hmm.
So
Now, did you actually become a good pianist, or did you just do that as a child?
I I actually became fairly good. I
Mhm.
just after a while, when I got to a point where my mom could pick on my sister, I was kind of okay. I'll be done with piano for now.
Sounds like me with piano. I went through it for about 10 years, from age 5 to like 15 or something like that. And then
Hmm.
I just kind of
Right.
gave it up, probably for girls or whatever. But
But probably for anything.
yeah, I mean, the good thing is I did learn about classical music. I did learn music theory, and I know how to compose. So I mean, and I just know all the things about music, which is very helpful, when I'm listening to music or writing about music or something, just that I can draw and stuff like that. But anyway, and like you, I've never been an animator, although I wanted to be one. So did you ever want to be one?
Oh, I wanted to be one with all my heart. I just knew I never had the skill that would get me there. In fact, I had met Chuck Jones many times during the latter part of his life after I started getting really interested in Warner Brothers.
Mhm.
And at one point he said, I told him, I said, I really love watching you draw because I have no artistic capability. He goes, I could teach you to draw Bugs Bunny. And I said, don't make a bet you can't win because you can't. But
Yeah, yeah,
I appreciate the fact that you think you could.
yeah,
But to those people that have that talent, you look at a Tom Cito, a Bob Kurtz, Floyd Norman,
yeah.
you watch them, the way their hand moves across the paper, and to me, it's just absolute awe
Right.
because it's a skill that I don't possess, and I obviously don't have the talent to ever possess it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I did want to become an animator. Yeah, I do have the ability to draw, and I can draw pretty realistic. Not as good as the top masters there. You're mentioning Chuck Jones and everybody, but what I didn't have was patience, and um, I realized, it's like it's a long, hard slug, and I don't know when you were kind of interested if you did enter the industry, but in my case, it was the early 80s that I was going to be entering. And animation was like way at the bottom of, good stuff at that time as a
Mhm.
career choice and just what was being presented in animation. So I abandoned that and went to television and radio and got a degree in that. But, you know, I never lost my interest in animation, so I'm like you, I've collected a lot of the things like you have on the wall, statues, toys, cells, uh, animation drawings, and everything like that. So, I guess we have that in common. And our mutual friend who introduced us, Camden Spees, he's all into that too, and he can't draw worth a lick either. So it's like,
But
yeah,
the other side of that is Camden knows more than any human should be allowed to know,
I
right? I
know.
mean,
I go,
he
wow,
is. I spent some time talking to him one time
mhm,
I think it was at a Chuck Jones event, but I can't remember.
yeah,
And in about 5 minutes, he said about 19 things that I was like, I had no clue.
yeah.
I didn't know that
Yeah,
about animation films and cartoons that I probably should have known that about, by the
right,
way.
right. About the only thing I've educated him on is my perspective of things in real time. Like I can't tell you what happened in the 1950s because I wasn't there. I was born in the 60s, 66. But in fact, on Walt Disney's death day, I was born. Is my actual birthday. But but I can tell people what my experience was growing up in California during the 70s and 80s, and some parallels what people said about that time period and some doesn't. It depends on what it is. So that's what I'd like to educate Camden about because it's not generally a sweeping generalization across country. I mean, this isn't animation, but we were talking about Abbott and Costello, and he says, "Didn't you see the Abbott and Costello show growing up?" And I go, "No, no. It was all in black and white, and they didn't like showing black and white things in the San Francisco area. So I never saw it until it came out on DVD, you know. And here he is, younger than I was when I first was exposed to it. He has it on Blu-ray and all that stuff. And he goes, well, I go, you have the benefit of everybody like us wanting this stuff out and wanting the ability to own it, and now you can. So it's like, but it wasn't that easy in the early days. So
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell, and that's the Walt Disney part of it. And I guess at that point, I didn't know animators as much as I knew because my grandfather was at Western. I
mhm,
knew a lot of the illustrators for the Golden Books,
mhm,
right? So while they're not the animators like the Mark Davis and the Thomas and Johnson and those folks, they were the people like Flug and Weitzman and those who kind of rose up and made a name as an illustrator rather than an animator. But the parallels to me are about the same.
mhm,
An animator has to worry about timing and all of that, and I
right.
get that. And an illustrator is just, oh yeah, okay, I'll draw this picture and be done with it.
Mhm.
You know,
Now,
I'm,
did
I'm
you?
not a huge fan of show and tell on this, but I will say
Okay.
this is a book that I always have on my shelf.
Oh wow, I
It's
don't think I've ever seen that.
Oh, I think it came out in 62, 63
Yeah.
somewhere. And it's a little, well, it's actually the big golden book
Yeah.
that Western did for Gay Paris.
Mhm.
And the other thing that sits next to it is I have the original stat camera sheet that book was shot from.
Oh wow.
So while everybody can run out and get the book,
Yeah.
this is the one that Western did the actual book production from.
Now,
So, and it's things like that that I like.
did you tour around Western Publishing, or was it not something to be bothered with, or what?
I loved it. In fact, I'm
Okay.
sure that there were a lot of people there that hated Fridays because on Friday I would go into work with my grandfather,
Hmm.
and then at lunch my grandmother worked down there, so I would then ride back with her at lunch. But
Hmm.
during that time, my grandfather would say, "Okay, I, I've got I've got important stuff to do," and he'd be off. And
Hmm.
I'd be wandering around West, and I'm sure that, if OSHA was around as big now, they would have shut that place down in a heartbeat
Right.
because I was walking around all the floors where they cut the playing cards and printed but they had the lithography presses running.
Hmm.
To me, it was just an all sorts of a new magic.
Now, did they actually create the books and the comics and everything there, or is everybody did it out of their own homes and mailed it in?
Almost all of the artwork things, they didn't have the artists really on staff,
Okay.
obviously.
Okay.
Most of those, in fact, were kind of like, I guess we would consider more freelance photography kind of, right?
Right.
They would send in and they'd be under contract with either Disney, if it was a Disney comic or a Disney Golden Book like Sleeping Ron Diaz, for instance, who worked on Sleeping Beauty as I think he was a background artist, one of the best actually. And he did obviously the Little Golden Book, a lot of the animation or the illustration work for the Little Golden Book, Sleeping Beauty.
Hmm. And did you know how the process was done for any of those type of books? Like, were there certain artists that were assigned those books because they could draw a book illustration better than, say, an animation cell, or did you know anything about that?
I didn't really know a lot about that except the
Excuse
people that drew those that were illustrators
me. Hmm.
never. I'm thinking, but I don't know of any instance where any of them did anything like animation. I mean, they were
Okay.
just book illustrators,
Right.
and that was kind of what they did versus the animators who are kind of the next plane up in my book.
Right. I guess, that kind of came later with like Hanna-Barbera or something where they had some of the animators doing the comics and the books
But
and stuff at
yeah,
the same
and
time.
a
But
lot of that was
yeah,
done in-house with Hanna-Barbera. Right?
right.
They were doing a lot of that and producing that, so they had the animators and they had all of that already on staff. Western or even Simon and Schuster at the time, they were basically putting together books and they were using, Disney said, here's the artist you're going to use for this Scrooge book or whatever it was, and
Yeah.
that's what they did.
Yeah. Because I was thinking on Disney, people like Carl Barks and Walt Kelly and stuff like that. then they originally worked for Disney and then they left and
Right.
started working for comics and their own things and whatever,
Yeah,
So,
and I did I remember seeing Carl Barks because he did a lot of the animation for the Duck comics. I mean,
mhm,
he's kind of the duck guy, right?
right.
So when they started doing Scrooge and things like that, Carl Barks did a lot of that animation for the
hmm
comics, Gold Key and Dal.
hmm So going back a little bit, you said you met Disney many times. Was Disney your only love originally, or did you just love everything like the Fleischer stuff and
Well, I
uh,
was,
what else was it? Universal Woody Woodpecker, whatever.
oh yeah, I was, to me, I didn't even categorize cartoons by, oh, this is Disney or this is Hanna-Barbera or this is, Fleischer or this is Looney Tunes. To
Mhm.
me, it was a cartoon
Yeah,
because that was long before I knew that, it took thousands and thousands of cells to make several minutes of animation.
right.
But, no, I probably didn't know. No, I didn't. To me, it's a cartoon and I like it. I knew what I liked, right? I like the Flintstones and I like all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. I mean, when they started going through that and even some of the stuff that was, what I would consider real campy, I was kind of okay with that as long as it's animation.
Yeah, I was
So
pretty much the
it
same
wasn't
way.
until later
Yeah,
that I
uh,
started saying, now that I know what animation is and what the different cartoons are, and actually started to look at some of the different styles of the animators and even getting to know some of the animators. That's what made some of those cartoons even more special
mhm,
than they would have been if I just said I love cartoons.
right. Now, in my case, the book that was the game changer was Leonard Maltin's Of Mice and Magic. I was like 15 when that came out, and I just ate it up, basically. I absorbed it. Did you have any similar type of epiphany book that kind of made you from just I'm watching cartoons to, wow, I really want to know about the history of this and everything else?
I think that followed after I started really getting into animation.
Hmm
Before I started collecting animation in earnest, I collected what I'll call cartoon art, but it's
hmm
like comic strip art, right? If you look at, the different comic strips and comic books, I collected a lot of that art. And that's where what really led me back into animation with a passion, because when I looked at a standard comic book panel, it was
hmm
generally three panels, maybe four. And it was the setup, the story, and then the punch. And that's why they were all 3 or 4 panels long.
hmm
And then I started seeing things like Gary Larson and Bizarro from Dan Peraro, and
hmm
some of those, even Tom Wilson with Ziggy, some of those that started doing this or always did the single pane comics, right? It was
Right.
only one frame. There
hmm
was no setup. It was all there. And with one caption, the whole story was right there. And I thought,
hmm
this is really amazing, right? They told me a whole story and I didn't have to look to the right or the left. It was right there in front of me.
Right.
And years later, well, not years, that was in the early to mid 80s. In 89, Diane and I were driving down Pac Coast Highway and we were going to Laguna or La Jolla or Los San Diego, one of the L cities down the coast.
hmm
And when we got to Corona del Mar, Diane slammed on the brakes and said, "Look at that." And I looked over and there was this yellow awning. All it said on it was Chuck Jones, and the window was filled with animation.
Hmm.
And so we went in, and that's when I bought my first cell.
Hmm.
And I did that because when I walked in, it was a cell of Max and the Grinch, where he was shaking Max.
hmm
And I realized that with no text, no other information, I knew exactly what that single pane was telling me, and
hmm
probably knew what the dialogue behind it was, even if I didn't have a complete concept grasp of the movie.
hmm
And that to me took, amazing stuff to the next level.
So was this shop? What was it? Just Chuck Jones's
It was a
studio,
Chuck
or
Jones gallery. It was
oh, it was a gallery.
it was
Okay, okay,
yeah, it was, but it was, I think it was the only one in Corona Del Mar because that's where Chuck lived. I think at that time he
yeah.
lived in, well,
Hmm.
not at that time, he lived in Corona Del Mar.
Hmm.
And so that was the Chuck Jones gallery, and they would, sell all of it.
Hmm.
And they started doing collector events where, when you would buy cells there, and then every once a year they would have, um, the Chuck Jones get together, whatever it was called, I don't recall.
Hmm.
Excuse me. But they would hold that, and that's where on a weekend it would start, like on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And during that time, some point in time, Chuck would make an appearance.
Hmm.
And it was it was astounding to watch because when Chuck would come in, it was like the whole place was just kind of din going on, and Chuck would walk in, and it was it was nothing, silence. And he would sit down and start, telling stories and talking.
Hmm.
And the people sat cross-legged on the floor. Nobody said a word. I mean,
Wow.
you would have thought that, you know, we're now seeing something that everybody knew was just incredibly, incredibly an incredible gift to be able
Hmm.
to listen to somebody that, you know, that was Chuck Jones.
Hmm.
And during that time, we had a chance, during that period of time, over several events. Diane and I had got a chance to sit with Chuck at the animation table while he did a couple of commissions for us.
Hmm.
And the one that I really love, and I think I mentioned it last time, he was doing a Grinch with Cindy Lou Who, where the Cindy Lou's holding out the big red ornament, and the
Right.
Grinch is taking it from him. And he was drawing, and of course his hand was so fluid as it moved across the page, and he hardly even looked at it. He would be looking at us and asking us questions and talking, and at one point in time he looked down, he was drawing Cindy Lou's head, and it
Right.
looked more like an egg, or I mean, it was way off model,
Right.
but it wasn't the kind of thing where I was going to go, oh, that's way off model, because it was Chuck, and if it was off model, that was by design, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And even my friend who was standing out there went, I could see him shaking his head going, oh man, that isn't right. And Chuck looked down and he went, oh, this isn't right. And he took an eraser and erased the entire, I'd never seen him use I didn't even know he had an eraser. And he drew it again, and the entire piece is spot on model.
Wow.
It's an absolute masterpiece. So
So
that was kind of
can't get
interesting.
distracted talking to you, I guess. This is the moral
No,
of the
and
story.
you
Yeah. But I, I guess you mentioned it at the top of the show. It's like so who are some of the animation greats that you've met over the years, if you want to just name drop for a few minutes?
Oh, I love the name. So I think one of my, and there, I'll caveat a couple of things before I go on so that people don't think that, oh, he likes that because it's that. There are some people that would say, what do you think of some of the Disney movies? And my first go-to is kind of, I would look at and say, I like Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
But I like Sleeping Beauty for a lot of reasons that people would say, you know what, that doesn't sit in my top five of Disney's. But I like it because I know Floyd Norman,
Hmm.
and as the first Black animator, that was the film that he worked on first when he started with Disney.
Hmm.
Ron Diaz, who was a very good friend,
Hmm.
did a lot of the background work on Sleeping Beauty, and I think that was one of the first films he might have worked on at the time.
Hmm.
And my dearest friend currently is Mary Costa.
Hmm.
And I mean, Mary and I talk, I don't know, probably every month at least. And, she was the voice of Aurora,
Right.
and actually an opera star in her own right,
Right.
obviously. So, when I put all that together and I look at something like Sleeping Beauty, that whole thing means a little more to me than some of the others because I just feel a little more connected to it. I
Hmm.
think Mark Davis is probably, I don't want to say the best animator ever, but he certainly is way, way up there in my mind.
Hmm.
I think that his eye to paper was absolutely exquisite.
Right.
And I
Hmm.
remember I had met him before, but what I thought was interesting was I had a chance to meet Alice, who in Alice Davis.
Oh, okay. I
And
was saying
yes, sorry,
Catherine
just a
Beaumont.
random Alice. Just pick an Alice. That's what I meant.
Okay.
But I had a collection of photographs that I
Mhm,
had gotten, and they were photographs that were taken of the Small World dolls when
mhm,
the exhibit was installed at the World's Fair in New York in '64. And pictures were taken and sent back to He because he was going to do the restoration work on it.
hmm,
Well, all of those costumes, a lot of those costumes were all done by Alice
hmm,
when, the Small World was put together. So I put together the photos into a montage and took it out to got to meet Alice, and I gave that to her, and she was pretty happy about that, I think.
mhm.
And so the second time I was there, I got to spend a little more time talking to her, and she took me into what had been Mark's office. And she said, you can, that's the desk that he had that's at Disney if you want to sit there. And I said, no. And I just took a chair that was next to it and said, I'll just sit here. And she goes, oh, good choice. That's the chair Walt used to sit in when he'd come and see Mark. So I jumped up and said, well, why don't I just sit on the floor? But yeah, so those were two that I think were really special. Um, let's see. I think the other dear friend that I made was June Foray,
Oh yeah.
and I met her. She came to an event early '90s, maybe it might have been 1990, 1991. And if you know June or knew June, she was maybe 4'11"
Yeah.
tops, and probably weighed as much as a small book.
Yeah.
And she came walking in. We were at it wasn't a restaurant, it was like a bar, but it was closed off for the event. And she came in and they hopped her up. And so she was sitting on the bar. And the first thing she said is, where the hell's my scotch? And then, we all got to talk to her for a while, and I took some pictures. And I sent her a note with one of the pictures and said, I'd love for you to sign it if you would. And if not, no problem. About a week after I send it, the phone rings and I pick
Mhm.
it up. She goes, is Don there? And I said, this is Don. She goes, darling, this is June for, and she's talking like Natasha from,
Yeah.
right. And and it was June. And
Hmm.
we talked and we talked and we talked for, I don't know, 40 minutes, an hour. And it ended. And she said, you should come, if you're ever out in California, let me know. You want to get
Hmm.
together. And I said, I'm out in California all the time. We go there a lot.
Right.
So every time we would go to California, whether it was Bill and I or Diane and I would call June and she would say, oh, here's the time, let's do it. And we'd go over to her house and just spend hours and hours listening to her. And
Cool.
the stories that she had out. And to me, when I look at her, she she did so much with movies because instead of bringing back actors to redo a sequence, they'd call in June, who would do that voice, and they wouldn't have to pay an actor to come or an actress to come back and do those lines that they needed re-recorded. So
Right.
she was in a lot of movies, but just as the voiceover. But listening to all the things that she would talk about from the industry, where it was, I used to eventually take a tape recorder and
Hmm.
I would just start it, and she would go on for hours.
Wow.
And it was really really intriguing listening to her, and she was such a sweetheart.
Mhm. Fortunately, I did get to meet her a couple times. The first time, I think, I'm trying to think if that's the first time or the second time. Well, it might have been the second time, but uh, I had just written my book about total television, and Ben Eaton Galleries was in San Diego Comic Convention, and she had just done her book uh, with Mark Evanier and Earl Kress. You might know me from whatever I think is the name of the, you know,
Yeah, that she did
you
one, I
grew.
think it was Perverse Universe, and then the other one was Did You Grow Up With Me Too, or
That's the
something
name
like
of it.
that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And they just sat us side by side, so we're both signing books, and so while we're signing books, we just chit chat about different things. I'd ask her a few things. Years later, there was the other time I met her, that I know for sure is Gerald Van Sitters did a Rocky and Bullwinkle or Jay Ward oversized hardback, and
Yeah,
he
I
and
have several.
yeah, and excuse me, my throat's tickling. Sorry. And he and her were sitting side by side, and they were just signing the books. But at that point in her life, she was very, very elderly, and so I was like, wow. And when she signed, his hand was moving very slow, and I was like, oh, because I know everybody gets older and passes on and stuff. It's just sad when when you previously saw her, she was all energetic and everything like that. And it's just like, so
Yeah,
yeah,
you're right, because I remember early on when we would visit, and I'd ask her questions about that because she was the voice of Chatty Cathy, if you remember that doll that
yeah,
was on the
yeah,
market,
yeah,
right? And she did the other creepy voice, oh, Talking Tina from the
yeah.
Twilight Zone. I
Twilight
think
Zone, yeah,
I can't remember the name of the episode even,
yeah.
but and so I said, I remember this voice, and Talking Tina would just used to creep me out. So then she spent 10 minutes talking in Talking Tina voice, and I was like, oh, this this is really kind of creepy. So, but then as time went on,
Yeah,
everything she'd, do a voice, and it sounded, everything started to sound kind of like Natasha. And that
yeah,
was, it was like, it was Rocky. No, it wasn't Rocky. It was kind of Natasha that was a squirrel. And
yeah.
yeah, you're right.
My favorite voice of hers is always, I always call it the Marjorie Main voice. I don't know what else to call it, just that kind of gruff, voice that she'd use for, heavy set women and stuff like
Witch
that.
Hazel.
Yeah, yeah. And, that type of voice, and she used it a lot, but it always would crack me up. So anyway,
I think that was actually probably closer to her voice.
yeah,
I mean, that's kind of how we, when you sit and talk with her for a while, that was, she always was like, oh, I'm kind of talking to Witch Hazel.
yeah,
Even when she wasn't doing a voice, she was kind of Witch Hazel to me.
right. So, who else have you met over the years? Just curious.
Let's see, Americasa, yeah. Well, most of the animators that are friends now are
Hmm.
people like Tom Cito, Bob Kurtz, who I think the
Oh
world
yeah.
of Bob.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, when I first met Bob, he was at some event, and I got a couple of pictures, and I think I bought a cell that was from Blind Golf, which is, if you've never seen it or anything, it's hilarious. It's a bunch of golfers, and they're on hole like 496. They're all blind.
Mm.
It certainly wouldn't fly today, but it flew then. But I sent him a note and said it was great to meet you, um, and would you sign this picture for me? And his his assistant. Actually is not his assistant. It's actually his daughter Shelley, who works
Hmm.
at Kurtz and Friends. Um, Called me up and said, Bob actually remembers meeting you. And I said, well, that could be bad or it could be good. I don't know. And he'd love to sign it. And he did. And so the next time I was going out to California, I had some cells from Jurassic Park, Mr. DNA and the dinosaur, where he did the animated piece where they're on the ride at Jurassic Park.
Hmm.
And then some of the cells from City Slickers.
Mm.
And I called Bob at his studio and said, hey, I have these cells. Um, would you be interested or could I talk you into signing them? He goes, yeah, come on by. So I went by, and again, it was another 2 3 hours spent talking to Bob, and he brought up the one thing that I don't know whether I should thank him or curse him for. He kept throwing out the name Teehee,
Hmm.
and who was obviously his mentor. Not
Yes.
obviously, he mentioned it. He said, "This is my mentor, Teehee,"
Yeah.
and I felt I felt kind of bad because I didn't know a lot about Teehee. In fact,
Hmm.
I knew nothing about Teehee. Yeah, I'd seen Mother Goose Goes Hollywood and Coconut Grove. I've seen all those, but I really hadn't looked into the animation slash writer aspect of them, which T was on um, not Coconut Grove, but Mother Goose Goes Hollywood. He was the writer.
Hmm.
So I thought, well, I must find out more. Well, in doing so, I became a rabid tea collector and ended up with, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings because T was a prolific drawer. I
Yeah.
mean, he drew everything. I have some sheets from his where he would attend the Academy Awards,
Hmm.
and on the back of it, he would do his drawings.
Hmm.
So those are all fabulous things. And I every now and then I would say to Bob, "Damn you," because you set me down another cataclysmic hole.
Yeah. And also, he worked everywhere, it seemed like, and I interviewed Bob Kurtz mainly twice. I've talked to him a few times, but once was for my DePatie Freeling book, and the other was for my Chipmunks book, which also is a Format Films book. And he was explaining how Teehee worked with him there and everything like that, and how he designed the Chipmunks and everything like that. So long, boring story unless you read the book. But yeah, he's very entertaining. I shouldn't say that he's boring. No, he's never boring. So he has great stories to tell. So.
Yeah, he's a class act. I think the world of Bob.
Mhm.
And I think that almost any animator that's doing a lot now, I probably run into, but I probably haven't formed the kind of friendships that I've done with like Bob and and,
Mhm.
and even Tom.
Mhm. And then, did I'll just name drop on my end, people I've met over the years, but I wasn't ever friends with them, but I met them. Did you ever meet Frizz Freeling or no?
I met Frizz.
Okay.
I did not know him.
Yeah, that's
And he always
basically
reminded me kind of Jew, and he was a little short guy, but I mean, he was just always on a mission.
right. And another one I met, I was supposed to meet both Hannah and Barbera when I bought it's on my wall, I'm looking at original artwork of Yogi Bear at an art gallery, but Joe Barbera was sick that day, so I only met Bill Hanna. And he was nice and cordial to everybody. A lot of people say he never really did much, on the animation side. That was more of Joe's kind of forte. But I don't know. I thought he was, cordial enough. So, you know.
I think most of the drawings I have that are signed by both Bill and Joe were drawn by Joe. When
Yeah.
you look at, Rosie the Robot and, some of those, I
Mm,
would look at it and go, oh, okay, I have a couple of those that Joe signed. So I know
mhm.
he did them. And then I would see some others and some of it was, oh, okay. I know that Joe drew that and Bill just like, oh, Bill Hanna. Okay, there you go.
Yeah. The funny thing is, and I'm looking at this again, is this Yogi Bear drawing. It's a two panel. You're talking about single panel strips. Well, this would be the size of a single panel strip of Yogi Bear, but they did two panels in the single panel spot. When I bought it, it was attributed to Gene Hazelton, and so that's how I thought it was. And years later, I found out it wasn't Gene Hazelton at all. It's Eisenberg. So it's like, well, yeah, so oh well, but so I actually corrected on the back of the thing. I got it from Circle Art Gallery, which was a fine
Yeah,
art
I know
gallery
circle
that,
art.
yeah, and they'd get like various animation pieces every so often, and I probably paid way too much for it, but I'm happy I got it. But I actually lined out the name Gene Hazelton because it's not. So anybody in the future will see if they come in possession. What did he do that for? Well, it's because I was correcting
This
the error. You know. So anyway,
I the other one I know I've met Bob Singer before, and I think Bob
okay.
is one of those classics. And I at one time had some background roughs, a panel of
Mm,
four of them for a Flintstones episode. And when I got them, somebody said, "Oh, that's Bob Singer."
mm,
I said, "Well, I'm skeptical, but okay." So I sent an image of it to Bob,
mhm.
and Bob said, well, I can tell you two things. Number one, it's not mine. and number two is that's Dick Bickenbaugh. I
Yeah.
said, okay, well, there's two pieces of information that
Mhm.
helped me a lot. But the funny story about Bob, I asked him one time, do you still do, or do you do any commissions? Because
Mm.
I didn't have anything that Bob had drawn. I had, cells that he had worked on. And he said, well, only if it's something I like. And I thought, sounds like a challenge. I said, how about Flintstones? He goes, I like Flintstones. I
Oh,
said,
cool.
okay. So he said, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I've always liked the scenes where the family's in the car. And he goes, I love that scene. And I said, well, great. And so it would be, Fred and Barney and Wilma and Betty. He goes,
Mhm.
great. He said, what about the kids? I said, well, yeah, let's put in Pebbles and Bam Bam. I said, how about Dino? He goes, can't have it without Dino. I said, great. So he went off and he was drawn. And while I got to thinking about it, I thought, the character that I missed, that was actually in every episode, although I think he only appeared officially in 4 or 5 of the episodes. But it was Baby Puss, the cat that was
Oh,
always
yeah, yeah.
getting put out by Fred, and then it would come back in and kick Fred out. And
Mhm.
and he was in every episode that way.
Mhm.
So I called Bob and I said, what about Baby Puss? And I knew that by now the car is just packed with characters.
Mhm.
And Bob said, I got an idea. And so when the piece arrived, it was the car with Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty, the kids. And in the back was a sidecar with Dino or no, Dino was in the car with his head poked through the roof.
Okay,
Baby Puss was in the sidecar behind the car, riding along with it. And
cool.
it's a fabulous piece.
Mhm. You're naming all these people that have actually been on, this podcast. Camden actually got Bob to be on the show pretty recently, so and he was very good,
Yeah, I think it was
yes.
just a couple of episodes ago. If I saw it out there, I haven't looked at it yet. It was after Tom had been on.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so I always think Camden, he's the one who's gotten most of the people. I've, you know, tried to get certain ones on here, and then he manages to do it, so I'm like, "Okay," you know? Um, one of these days, I still am trying to get Floyd Norman. He just has said he'd like to do it, but he's too busy. But one of these days, hopefully, I'll get him. But anyway, yeah,
Floyd's kind of what, because I've had a couple of things that I've done with Floyd, and he goes, "Oh, I just don't have time to do that. I'm really busy." And I know he is, because the guy probably works as hard now as he did when he, was actually
yeah,
fully employed by Disney.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, I'd get a note from him. He goes, "Ah, I finished those 3. I'll send them to you." So it's like, oh, okay, I guess, when
hmm,
it frees up, it frees up.
right. So, looking at your wall, you have like a little bit of everything. Like you have little statues, you have animation drawings, you have animation cells. What is your favorite thing to collect?
Um, Boy, that's kind of like saying who's your favorite kid if you have a few kids.
Well, I
But
mean, do you
it's
which do you prefer? I'll say this. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that's all you collect, but I mean, do you
I
prefer cells over
yeah,
three-dimensional figures, or
I do, only because when I look at, and I guess the order in which I would do it is, I would say the drawing is the absolute original, right?
yeah,
Because it was touched by the hand of either a director or a prime animator, or if you got the good cells, otherwise you got an in-betweener, right?
hmm,
And then the next thing is the cell,
hmm,
and those are kind of the one-offs, right? When you find a production cell, you know that it's the only one that exists. There may be others that are very close in a sequence down the line, 2 or 3 frames away,
hmm,
assuming they didn't peel off the arms and legs,
hmm,
but it's the only one of a kind.
hmm,
But and then of course when you get to the 3D things, most of those are, they're printed out, and even if they're limited editions, they may be limited to 50 or something, but it's still, there's 50 of those out there.
yeah,
But I still love them.
yeah,
I have a boatload of uh, Nightmare Before Christmas. Love Nightmare Before Christmas.
hmm,
Probably one of my top favorite cartoons, animation sequences. That Grinch is probably number one.
hmm,
Although if somebody disagreed with me, I wouldn't get in a fight over it, because I love them all. But the Grinch is probably my favorite.
hmm,
Nightmare. Mainly because I'm a huge Tim Burton fan.
Hmm.
Um, but I started adding the collectible side, and the Roadrunner is a bronze that was done by oh geez, shoot me if I forgot his name. Randy Noble.
Okay.
Or Lo, gosh,
Whoops.
it was Lawrence Noble. Randy's his son.
Oh, okay.
Um, and that was it's actually a color piece now, but originally he did um, six in the original patina, and
Hmm.
that was one of the test runs that they did. And let's see, the three-dimensional um, Wiley is a Dave Avanzano piece, which and I love Dave's work, but he does a lot of those cutouts where he makes a 3D image and puts it together, but they're all I guess they're fairly unique because those are all one of ones. I mean, he only makes one of them.
Hmm.
And then the up on the wall are some charcoals.
Yeah.
Back in 96. Well, somebody's gonna jump on my dates and I'm gonna be proved to be an idiot. But I think it was 96, 97. I'm gonna go with 96.
Okay.
Chuck did a series of Giclées. It was called the Character Portfolio. And it
Hmm.
was 20 limited edition Giclées of 20 different characters.
Hmm.
These are the original charcoals that the Giclée was
Mm.
made from. Well,
Wow.
two of them. The others are down the hall, but
Hmm.
and that's what those are. The Gossamer, which is up there, is probably one of my favorites, and it was one that I had a chance to sit and talk to Chuck about.
Mm.
And the amazing thing to me was the paper is just like an large orange piece of construction paper,
Right.
and the Gossamer is created by shadings, right? He shaded
Mm.
out, and I said it's amazing to me. This is what I wanted to say. I wanted to say it's amazing your use of negative space in creating Gossamer, right?
Right.
And what I probably said was, wow, that's really cool. I can't imagine how you would do that because all you've done really is you just blacked out the things that weren't Gossamer.
Right.
And Chuck, kind of looked at me like, wow, this is what it must be like to be slow. But he looked at me and said, Gossamer was on the page the whole time. I just needed to scrape away the stuff you didn't need to see. And I thought, that's why I don't animate. Right?
Right.
Because to me, Gossamer wasn't on the page. It was just an orange piece of paper.
Right. Different perspectives. Right.
It is.
What was I going to ask? Oh, I know. When you have gotten your various pieces of art and everything over the years, you said you stopped by that Chuck Jones gallery and stuff in the past and things like that. How did you get your pieces in the past? I think nowadays it's a lot easier with eBay and everything else.
Right.
But you're driving around and everything like that. But it, was it difficult in the early days of collecting to obtain pieces just because
It
it wasn't?
was it was more, I think then it required more personal work
Hmm.
because you had kind of your black book of galleries,
Right.
and you'd go, okay, the Chuck Jones gallery, this is where I do this, and then Circle Gallery and Intune and amazing, and all of those things, and you'd have them in there, and this is what I would get there. And so you'd have your contacts at those places. If I wanted something Simpsons, I was calling Acme up in California. If I wanted, something that was Seuss, I was probably calling Chase or whatever the place down in Louisiana was, and I can't remember what it was called.
That's okay.
But so I would call those places. If it was Schultz, everybody had, and then I had some go-to guys. Mike Van Eaton, probably one of the smartest guys on the planet when it
Yeah.
comes to animation. He's probably the only guy I've ever gone to and said, I don't know what this sells from. He'd go, oh, well, that's from, and he'd name it. And I go, oh, yeah, you're probably right. And he
Yeah.
would be. He's just an
Hmm.
amazing encyclopedia of information.
Hmm.
But and you're right. But now it's just, I can go online and find something somewhere. And it may be a place that I hadn't even, wasn't even in my realm of tracking, but
Hmm.
I can find it because It's online.
Hmm.
So yeah, right now I think collecting is easier
Yeah.
as far as being able to obtain things. The process to me is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
If I love it, I'm going to find it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of when.
Because I remember when I first got started getting the first time I ever saw an animation cell, period, was at Disneyland. And it wasn't uh the way it was like when Disneyland opened up. Apparently they had Roy Williams, and they'd sell them for like nothing, like $1 or something like that, maybe 50 cents or something like that. I never remembered those days. I always remember animation cells always as a kid being out of my reach. It's like, it'd be like $100, and then when I go down to Disney again, oh, I think I'll buy one. No, they're 300. It's like, but I've acquired a few different odds and ends over the years and stuff like that. Original art. I have like um, I always wanted a Bullwinkle cell or original drawing somewhere, and I was told for years, oh, all that stuff was destroyed, which pretty much all was, although Gerald Van Scissors did unearth some things. But uh, I managed to get animation cells from the Bullwinkle Cheerios commercial, so I have that. And original drawings too, so that's one of
Yeah,
my
I took some of
prized
those.
possessions. So
I think I only had one. Oh, I guess it was Rocky. It was
hmm.
Rocky Cell
Hmm.
and some Bullwinkle drawings, but they were from a commercial. And
Yeah.
I took them out, and June said, "Well, I didn't do the voice to Bullwinkle." I said, "I know that. I just thought I'd bring them so you can see them." She goes, "Oh no, I didn't say I wouldn't sign them. I just told you I didn't do the voice." And then she signed everything. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Cool. So at this point, are you on the hunt for anything and everything still, or do you kind of are you satisfied with what you have, or what's?
I don't know that any collector that has been infected with the collecting gene in earnest is ever satisfied with what they have. But I think at some point you look at it and go, there has to be at least an off-road that I can slow down a little. But I right now I have so many things that
Mhm.
when we built the house, this house, um, I said to the builder, Diana, I said, we only have three requirements, so it should be pretty easy. Number one is I love Frank Lloyd Wright. So I want something that has a lot of the oblique angles. I want a single story because I'm already too old to climb upstairs and my knees won't take it anymore. And the other thing is I want the maximum amount of wall space you can put in a house without making it look like a cinder block because I have a lot of art.
Yeah.
Well, once you fill up all the walls and you still have a storage unit full of art, it's probably time to be a little more selective.
Yeah.
And I think that's, am I hunting anything? I probably have some items that are on my hit list, but it's more like when I see something, I know I must have it when I see it
Right.
because I'll go, okay, collecting really is um, opportunistic, right?
Right.
The opportunity comes along
Hmm.
and you either take it or you don't. My biggest regret, I start to sound like Elmer Fudd. My biggest regret was I was out in Las Vegas decades ago, and there was a little animation place there. And I went in and they had three cells, three different cells, and they were Bugs Bunny. One
Hmm.
was Chuck Jones, one was Frizz, and I think one was Tex Avery.
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh, that's great. I'm gonna think about it, and I'll come back tomorrow." I went back tomorrow. Of course, Tex Avery was gone, and I thought, "Yep, that's what I get. I just learned my own lesson.
Yeah.
You snooze, you lose."
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that I'm kind of at the stage where maybe some of the it's kind of like cards, right? You deal from the top. Well,
Hmm.
it's time to deal off from the top some of the things that have floated up there and put the good stuff on the bottom
Yeah.
and kind of cull the collection that way and just keep adding the
Hmm.
premium stuff.
What do you think is your most prized possession? It doesn't mean most valuable. It just means that you're happiest of owning, if you can? I mean, you said, it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but that you love. But
I I think there are several, but they fall into a couple of categories. I
okay.
have one piece that is a Tex Avery. It's not even a cartoon. It was done in 1932, and it's done in India ink and colored ink, and
Hmm.
it's just a campy like a cartoon image, but it was kind of done at the time when Tex Avery had just was starting to break into his own. 1932, that wasn't too far out of school for Tex. So I think that's a really nice piece. I mean, it's got some real teeth from a historical standpoint into, some of the things that Tex did early on, and then how he moved into what we all know that he really did well. And the
Hmm.
other things that are really kind of special just because of who did them and the ability to participate, as limited as it was, were the Chuck Jones commissions that I have. Right, I have a couple of watercolors that Chuck did, and we sat there while he did the sketch. And Cindy Lou, who was one of them, and the other was one that I said, "Can I just give you some characters and tell you what?" And he goes, "So stop, just give me the characters." And I said, "Okay,
Yeah.
how about Bugs, Marvin, and Canine?" He goes, "That's all I need."
Hmm.
And then we sat there while he did, and it's fabulous. And
Hmm.
I really, and those kinds of things mean a lot. I have some things that Floyd Norman did for me that I think are stunning.
Hmm.
But I think the ones that I kind of would hang on to, and until the my dying day, would be the Chuck Jones commissions,
Hmm.
and probably the Tex Avery piece. And I'm sure that as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to go, "Oh crap, I meant to mention." But yeah, those are
Oh, that's
probably my
okay. No, there's no right or wrong. I mean, it's like, and usually when you like something, it's like at the forefront. I can think of things in my collection and go, oh yeah, yeah, I like this. And I mentioned the Bullwinkle cells. That is like one of my top things, because it was an opportunity thing that was because I asked like Van Eaton and stuff like that years ago, and he had nothing of Jay Ward. Later, he did, get some things, but it was impossible to get stuff like that way back when. We're talking late 70s, early 80s, and then slowly over time, some of that stuff came out, and that's when an opportunity came along. So yeah.
I think the only I own a lot of J Ward limiteds that he
Hmm.
signed. I don't think I have one J Ward cell that was signed. I do have quite a few drawings, but
Hmm.
that's J Ward cell signed cells. Those are kind of one of the elusive holy grails that are out there.
Right.
And if
Yeah,
they
mine
are,
aren't signed though, but it's like at least they're originals. That's one thing I'm
right.
happy about. But so is there any plans? And there's no no requirement to say yes. Is there any plans for your collection to make something with it, like a book or something like that, just to say, Here's my stuff," or anything like that, or give a talk or anything, or
Well, I've actually, at one time, I did what, well, I can't remember even what I called it. I think it was um, it was like the 2010 tour of the, I can't remember. It was some kind of a tour,
Mhm.
and it was basically a talking walk around tour of the house, and of all the animation that was there, and talking about the animation pieces, not about oh geez, I own this or I own that, but it was kind of like the history and the story behind how it ended up on the wall in that place,
Mhm.
why it sits there, why it, when other things get rearranged, why it never moves, or why maybe it's more seasonal than something else. I've got the back room that at one time was all Charlie Brown. It was
Mhm.
all the stuff that Bill Melendez did. And I had a number of cells that Bill had done, and they were signed by Charles Schultz, which made
Mm.
them. I mean, Charles Schultz never did animation, but
Right,
he signed the cells, and I said, "This is interesting because I know Bill did them, and
right.
Schultz signed them."
That's still cool.
But yeah, and so it was just kind of a tour, and I did do a couple of talks that way, but No, I've never. I don't know that anybody would even really care about it anymore.
Yeah. I just think of it because I go, hey, it looks kind of interesting. Some of the things, if you had a huge, huge amount that you could never possibly display everything at once, it might
Yeah,
be,
right. I
maybe.
think that you probably could if you moved out all the furniture and went floor to ceiling, but with a finite number of walls, I think some of the the other piece, and if you keep talking, I'm going to keep thinking of things that are my favorite, and now I'm going to name one more because
Okay.
this one is, and it's Tom Everhart. I
Hmm.
think that Tom Everhart, who is the only one that's still licensed to do Peanuts,
Hmm.
right, from the Schultz Foundation. I have a number, we have a number of his original acrylics
Hmm.
that hang in the house that I think are, and they're the older ones, and I think they're really stunning.
Hmm.
I love his work too.
Hmm. Do you have any original Charles Schultz
Um,
panels or
I
anything?
do. I have some drawings that he
Okay.
did.
Okay. But
I have
no original strips or
I
anything.
have one, but it's a daily. If
Yeah,
I had a
that's
if I
fine.
had a few Sunday comics,
Yeah.
um, I probably would have retired 40 years ago instead of two. But yeah, I just have one
If
a
you
daily
have
strip.
one, that's one more than I have because I don't have any. I mean, I never ever saw them around or anything. And then I think there was a couple opportunities, but it was kind of pricey. And then he passed away and then they went whoop, and that was the end of that. So it's like, yeah. So but I
Well,
do
there
have his
were.
autograph. I did meet the man once.
Oh, really?
He gave a talk in San Francisco about 1991, I think. And it was a friend of mine who says, "Oh, Charles Schultz is going to be at the De Young Museum. You want to go?" And I go, "Do I? Let's go."
Do I?
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't. I brought a book with me, having him sign it, just one of the strip collections, and I didn't know if he would sign anything or not. But fortunately, he did. But the thing I remember, and I always tell this story because it's just kind of oddly like, well, it is Schultz, but I mean, oddly like something that could be in Peanuts, but very dark. um Somebody had like a poster or something, and they he was taking questions from the audience, and it was a kid or something, a teenager or something, and they said, "Oh, can I come up there and get your autograph?" And he goes, "No." And he was sitting on this stool with just a microphone, and he says, "The reason why is the floor around me is electrocuted, electrified, or whatever." And it's like, wow, and then a few minutes later, he says, "Yeah, I was just kidding. Come on up." So everybody came on up and got their things autographed, and so I got my book autographed. So there we go. But
Yeah, unfortunately, as close as I ever got, I was at the Chuck Jones museum and
mm,
got to meet Jeannie Schultz.
yeah,
But that's as
I've
close
met her
as
a few times.
I
Yeah,
ever got. She was,
have you gone out to the Schultz Museum in Santa Rosa?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, no,
Oh,
it was gosh, where was it? It's right out where she lives because she doesn't live that far from the museum that I went to.
well, that should be the Charles
It
M.
must
Schultz
it,
Museum. Yeah,
it must be.
yeah. It's
I don't know my
and
cities out there. I just go where I'm told.
oh, okay, and the skating rinks next door and everything like that. So yeah, that's in Santa Rosa, California. So
Oh.
anyway, yeah, I've been there a few times. So, um, I guess at this point, I was just kind of curious. Any plans in the near future of traveling around and meeting and greeting or purchasing or whatever?
I'm with the last few years that have been kind of crazy, I've been kind
Right.
of reticent to go any place.
Mm,
As soon as that comfort level goes up, I sure will be heading back out to California. Like I said, Diane and I, we'd be out to California many times a year, probably 4 or 5, 6 times a year, just because we have a lot of friends out there, a lot of Disney artists that live out there, the Mike Congos, the Dan Killen,
mhm,
those folks. are all out there. So, we would go out there a lot because it's always been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But that's probably the first place I'll be heading back when we head out and
Yeah.
about.
Well, this calendar year was the first year I went back to California, and I went back 4 times this year. And I told my family, it's like, all right, I'm done. My dad lives down there and stuff. It's like I said, I'm done
Huh.
for this. You come and visit me now. But prior to this year, I had not gone in 3 years. So because of the pandemic and everything.
Mhm.
So I made up for lost time. So that's so this is, and then next year I'm going to do my first international travel in ages. I'm going to England uh to do a Beatles trip. So, that's,
Oh,
and I don't know if I'll see anything there animation wise, because it's like I'm familiar with a lot of British animation stuff like that too, and drawings and artists and stuff. So I'm like, I wonder what I'll see, because I have no idea.
my
So.
only uh, my only Beatles adjourn thing is that I was at we were over in England, and obviously I went to Abbey Road just to see the studio. And when I was living in Atlanta, many, many, many decades ago, the guy I was rooming with worked at Abbey Road for a while, and he was one of the guys that Roger Waters tagged to do some of the speaking on um, the Dark Side of the Moon album. And when they
Oh
went
wow,
through that,
yeah, I've heard that
he would
before.
go out
Yeah,
and grab random people like
yeah,
Paul
yeah,
McCartney was
yeah.
in the studio. And so I said, "So great, you were on one of the greatest selling albums in the history of music." And he goes, "Yeah, I guess." He said, "I don't remember receiving any royalties for it, for God's
Yeah, I
sake."
was gonna say you probably didn't even get paid.
Oh no,
Or,
he I think it was
uh,
like just a few words that, like he said, Waters or Gilmore asked a question, and he just responded, and then they
yeah,
moved on.
yeah, interesting. Although, if I did it, I'd be kind of impressed, especially
Oh yeah,
how successful that album is. So yeah, I'm on there.
yeah.
Well, I can say this once. One of my, it's not like I really have a bucket list, but just things that have happened in my life. I always wanted to be in the audience of a live concert album. I don't know why. And then I finally got my wish about 7 or 8 years ago. Mickey Dolenz did a tour of Oregon, and I'm in Oregon nowadays. And did a concert with a full orchestra, and they recorded it and they put it out on a CD, and I said, "Hey, I'm in the audience." You can't tell I'm in the audience, but I didn't go, "Hey, I'm here, it's Mark," but
It's me,
you know
Mark.
it's like because I was actually there, I remember it sounding like when I was there, so I'm like, hey. My only disappointment is they didn't put the full concert because they did more songs than what's on the album. So I'm like, anyway, but that's beside the point. Anyway,
I think one of the
um,
fun things I did when we were out in LA and I was out with Bill is
mhm.
went to one of the Simpsons table reads.
Oh yeah,
And
wow.
I'll tell you
Huh.
what, you kind of you come in and there's chairs that there's a big oval conference table where the voice actors sit,
Mhm,
Castellano and Nancy Cartwright and all of them sit around the table.
mhm,
And then around the edge of the room are just chairs. And that's where the people that come to listen to the table read.
mhm.
And they said, when we got there, they said, okay, just sit there, don't do anything, don't talk to any of the. And we're like, yeah, yeah, I'm fine. I'll just sit here. And you get a copy of the script and you sat down. As soon as they started, somebody said, hold on,
Mhm.
and came around to everybody and said, all right, whatever you like, laugh. Whatever you don't like, don't do anything. And I mean, they said, we want to know what's going to fly.
Huh.
And so we'd sit there and they'd be reading. Of course, they read in voices, and it's just hilarious to see Nancy
Right.
Cartwright doing Bart, and
Mm.
at that time they were doing Apu and everything. So
Mhm.
Azaria was just a hilarity. But on the things that kind of fell, you would see the back of the area were the writers.
Hmm.
And as soon as nobody laughed, you could just see them all writing. Oh my gosh, we got to change that.
Mm.
And you go, that's not one we're going to hear in the cartoon.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, the closest I think I've seen, well, I've seen table reads on TV, but I mean, the closest I've been where it's been live is, people doing radio recreations and stuff like that. So old time radio shows. So,
Yeah.
and met Chuck McCann, who of course did cartoon voices and things like that, and Marvin Kaplan and a few others that way. Let's see, I'm trying to think who else I met, but anyway, I could name drop them too, but I can't remember all the names right now. But anyway, um, anyway, I don't know if I have any more questions at this time. Is there anything else you'd like to say about just years of collecting before we go?
It truly has been one of the real rewarding aspects of, and you know, when I say collecting, I've collected stuff forever.
Yeah.
I think I've collected things vehemently in very small areas, and
Hmm.
drawings, cells,
Yeah.
and now the 3D.
Hmm.
And even some of the, you know, if you see, there's the Funko Pops, which are now the limited, um, which I think are some spectacular pieces that they put out. You know,
Hmm.
NFTs that are coming out now, or you know, they've done
Hmm.
a lot of NFTs. Warner Brother did NFTs. Well, not Warner, but I think Funko did a Warner Brothers collection in
Hmm.
NFTs. And it's just been it's been a lot of fun pursuing all those things. It's
Very
obviously kept me
cool.
busy for 40 years.
Very cool. Well, here's to 40 more years of collecting, and hope you find some more cool treasures and have more good encounters with animators and voice artists and all the other people that you enjoy. So,
I know I will, and I'm anxious to get back out to California to see some of those people.
okay. Well, when you plan a trip, let me know. I might plan a trip at the same time and we'll join forces.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, I thank you for being my special guest, Don. And this has been another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Arnold, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Mark.